On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, marking the end of the First World War, a day commemorated by Veterans Day, happening on November 11th of each year. While the Treaty of Versailles would not be signed, officially ending the war till months later, and America not officially acknowledging the end until 1921, this armistice concluded 19 months of involvement in the war by America. The boys came home, there was celebration in the streets, and everyone across the country had victory on their mind. In Portland, Oregon, only 16 days after this armistice, they already had a plan to show their support for the soldiers and their efforts. And that was to create what they called a Victory Mall, a creation that would run the entire length of downtown and even into the hills just south of there. This could be complemented by a Victory Highway that could run all the way down to Salem, the state's capital. The plan would be detailed, elaborate, demanding, and it would never happen. It's been a while since I've covered a piece of what-if history, looking at a possibility that never happened. And this story actually has potential connections to 3 other videos I've done, all of which I will address when pertinent. The 1910s were the real heyday of Portland, chasing after elaborate, sometimes crazy ideas, while the city was in the midst of substantial growth starting back in 1905. I've covered other stories from this time period, such as the Ross Island Park plan that never happened, and a plan for a subway tunnel under the city's Willamette River that also never happened. It was a time of coming up with ideas and seeing how grand they could become. But unlike some of these stories where the plan came as a result of one day someone had this idea, in the case of the story I will be covering here, the USA's shared victory in World War I, there was a pre-existing motivation. I'm sure once the war ended, cities and townships all over the country were looking for ways to celebrate this victory, with some hoping to outperform all the rest. This appears to be where the city of Portland was at during this time. On November 27, 1918, local papers reported that the city wanted to pursue constructing a, quote, Victory Avenue that would start at the north end of the city's North Park blocks at Gleason Street and Park. This avenue would go down these North Park blocks and continue on through the South Park blocks and then possibly into the hills beyond downtown, where what was called an immense hospital could be built. And then it was considered that this avenue could somehow continue on past this point and continue south to Salem as a highway. This was the working idea at the start, following the formation of what was called the Victory Memorial Association, put together specifically to establish a way to memorialize America's victory in the war. While this general plan was announced and given staunch support by Mayor George Baker, the association at this time asked locals to submit any further suggestions they had. And this initial idea was itself a combination of several individual suggestions that had been made. In particular, when the association met and took the first suggestions offered, these ideas mostly came from prominent locals, such as city engineer Olaf Largaard. He suggested cutting out the curbs on the North Park blocks and to convert the whole stretch into a several-lane wide super avenue. In the process, the North Park blocks would have been reduced to little more than a pathway down the middle. He also recommended building a new Union Depot to the north end of the blocks, a location directly across Broadway from where the current Union Depot, today's Union Station, was located. Mayor Baker would argue that the city had outgrown their current depot, which at the time had been functioning for less than 25 years. Largard said then that the route could continue on south through the South Park blocks and blaze the way to the Victory Temple, whatever that was specifically to be. This would, for the most part, be the plan that was followed, with alterations over time that I'll get into. Having a large hospital on the hill to the south end of this Victory Mall was suggested by a Reverend John Boyd. While being a state-of-the-art location that could also include a medical school, this hospital could have a post-war connection and that it could have a focus in helping those who were injured in battle. There was also a suggestion that this location at the end of the mall could be used to build a large historical museum. Fred Lockley, a well-respected local journalist, was the first one to recommend a highway running between Portland and Salem. Further support for the highway angle came from George Himes, the first curator of the Oregon Historical Society with a past in printing and publishing. He supported the highway first, but made a secondary suggestion that a building could be erected as a depository for pioneer relics and other historical collections. Several people who attended this meeting recommended the direct involvement by the parents of those who had served in the war in terms of deciding exactly what to do. This was done, resulting in a lack of enthusiasm overall for the highway angle, which probably felt impersonal by comparison to the Victory Mall idea itself. The idea of a Victory Highway, however, did not just go away. In a later map of what the full plan could look like, it was shown that from the South Park blocks, the route could turn over towards Terwilliger Boulevard, which was only months away from having a bond passed to help expand on it further. From there, it could continue south as the first leg of this highway. A local grain dealer named Max Hauser offered up $10,000 from the get-go to be put towards this highway, perhaps making it more enticing to some, especially if it were to be easily covered financially. For a long time, prior to the construction of Interstate 5, Old Highway 99 East was the primary route running between Portland and Salem, but construction on that highway wouldn't even begin until 1930. So the idea of constructing a highway at this time, back at the end of the 1910s, whether or not Victory was tied to it, made sense. And while the initial idea was to have this Victory Highway run down to Salem, only days after the Victory Memorial Association formed, the right-of-way of the historic Barlow Road, dating back into the middle 1800s, was offered up as a possible alternative Victory Highway, making for a solid route between Portland and Mount Hood. A subcommittee of 15 individuals would be selected to look into the matter and to determine the best project to go with. This committee, as requested, included several individuals who were parents of those who served in World War I. It also included local businessmen Ben Selling and Ira Powers. After a couple weeks of allowing this subcommittee to look into the matter, while further suggestions came pouring in from intrigued locals, a meeting was held on January 4th, 1919, in the office of Mayor Baker at City Hall. At this meeting, the planned memorial was chosen, a more fleshed-out version of what had been suggested initially. Other suggestions that came in during this time, ideas that came and went and were never seriously considered, included building an airplane field, an orphanage, a civic university, a steamship line, a stadium, and even one local woman suggested constructing a greenhouse to grow roses for the sick. But in the end, the idea chosen seemed to be the inevitable one. The proposed idea was presented in local papers the following day, including a detailed drawing of how epic this thing could become. I really do love the artwork created for planned projects in Portland and other cities around this time period. They really made you feel something truly unprecedented could happen here in a day and age where technology was so primitive compared to now, and yet it still looked so effective, I would argue even by modern standards. The new Union Depot was kept for this plan, but would serve a much stronger purpose than just being a more modern train station. A map of how the completed mall could look shows a new depot that was approximately 3 blocks by 5 blocks in size, roughly filling the space between Broadway and 9th Streets, going east and west, and Gleason and Lovejoy Streets going north and south. The fact that the depot would fill space as far north as Lovejoy Street is important, as the fairly new Broadway Bridge came out at Broadway and Lovejoy. This meant the bridge would be in close proximity to the new depot, as it had been with Union Station. But unlike Union Station, this new depot would be built with the objective of streetcar traffic from the bridge going straight into the depot. It would access it on the second level of this structure, with streetcar lines on the west side and to the immediate south coming in at the ground level. Local to out-of-state train traffic would come through here as well. Despite a different planned location, this idea syncs very closely with the plans for a new depot I discussed in another video of mine. A planned depot that also connected directly with the Broadway Bridge and was an element of a 1912 city plan put out by landscape architect Edward Bennett for the city of Portland. This new depot wouldn't just be beneficial in the creation of a new depot, but it would serve as a gateway into the city. Train travel was still the primary form of traveling long distances, despite the booming popularity of the automobile. Outsiders coming into town would most likely access Portland through its primary train station, and if that dropped people off at the head of the North Park blocks, this would be the site where they would officially enter town. So the thought of converting these North Park blocks into a massive Victory Avenue was enticing, and there was further plans to include a large monument to democracy, which would be put on the other end of the North Park blocks, just north of Burnside Street. Even at this time, over a decade before it would happen, the city knew at some point they were going to have to widen Burnside, meaning eventually it would become a more prominent route through town. And what better place to have a major victory monument? A true gateway to the city, while showing Portland's great love and respect for its war veterans. A secondary way for people to come into town could be by boat. The thought then was that a state-of-the-art municipal dock could be constructed near the Broadway Bridge in an area that was called blighted and degraded at the time. This dock could both improve the appearance of the waterfront in this area where visitors would arrive, and it would provide a viaduct that could carry people from the river directly to the new Union Depot. So those arriving by boat could truly enter the city at this gateway as well. The avenue could run the length of downtown from the new Union Depot to the south end of the South Park blocks, where downtown ended near the hills to the south and west of there. These hills had hardly been developed, with the city's iconic Peugeot's castle standing up there almost by itself. Even by the end of the 1920s, this area was still mostly undeveloped when a man named Max Loeb pushed for the creation of a massive memorial park to be built there. Another story I've covered. In 1919, These hills were forested and practically devoid of civilization, making it a prime spot for some sort of development. While the idea of building a hospital on the hill was not entirely abandoned, by this time in January, the avenue through the park blocks was set to end at a large memorial park, starting at today's College Street near the Shattuck School, part of Portland State's campus today, and running up into the hills. It was even suggested a Greek-themed theater could be built upon the hill, and much of the park could be coated in the forested beauty that already existed up there, hopefully connecting to Penoyer Park, today called Governor's Park, a small piece of land donated to the city to be used as a park by then Oregon Governor Sylvester Penoyer. This would have been nice, as even by the time Max Loeb came along with his park idea, it was noted that the former Penoyer Park had been neglected for the majority of its existence. At the peak of this planned memorial park, there would be a national monument type structure erected, referred to as the Shaft of Victory. The map outlining this project still included a hospital idea, but it was suggested, along with a medical school, to be located a little further south in the hills near Terwilliger Boulevard. And there was probably a reason for this. You see, while having a large hospital to the south end of this whole thing was a thing from the beginning back in 1918, it almost seemed like everyone involved was blissfully unaware of something else that was going on at this same time. At this time, discussions had already begun about building a new Multnomah County hospital. And just before Christmas 1918, it was announced that this hospital would be built on Markham Hill, just south of where this Victory Memorial Hospital was planned on being built. This hospital would be erected on land they secured from the University of Oregon Medical School. So, you could say, as far as a hospital, this project was let off the hook, because that was happening regardless. And what's funny is that early on in these discussions, it was noted that the new hospital would be expensive, to the point that arguments were posed that we could have this new hospital or that year's Rose Festival, but we couldn't have both. Obviously, the hospital was a done deal, but would there then be a 1919 Rose Festival? For the city, things would not be so easy, as this planned county hospital became an albatross around its neck. With a few $100,000 set aside to get things going, more than $1 million would be spent by the time the new hospital was done. The work, too, seemed to just carry on forever, with construction beginning in June of 1920. But patients from the old hospital would not even be moved there for another 3 years, and the hospital itself would not be considered officially complete until the end of 1923. And with time, it would continue to grow, with a veterans hospital later added to the hospital medical school. And today, it's the well-known location of the Oregon Health and Science University, or OHSU. It represents the closest any part of this post-war project would come to happening, and it wasn't even really a part of it. Not a whole lot was discussed about the space between the South End Memorial Park and the memorial around Burnside Street, aside from a Liberty Temple and possible museum along the South Park blocks at Madison Street. Strangely enough, the same area where the Portland Art Museum would later be opened. Other than that, there was just a small issue that this avenue would have to cut unobstructed through the middle of the city, including the roughly 8-block stretch from Ankeny to Salmon Street that marked the gap between the city's North and South Park blocks. I covered the story on why these two stretches of park blocks have never been connected to make a complete block in a video a couple years ago, something the city desired since the two park blocks were created. But there was always something preventing this from happening, And by 1919, these several blocks between Ankeny and Salmon were lined with buildings. Mayor Baker acknowledged right away, in an almost breezy manner, like it would be easy, that all of these blocks would need to be condemned by the city. This way, they could have full control of those blocks, making the plan work, and even possibly redeveloping these blocks to hopefully increase their property value. And that said, we have to start taking note of the problems with this plan, as only a month after it was officially adopted, come early February 1919, this project would seem to gradually disappear. Even with the official adoption of this plan at a January 11th meeting held at the Portland Hotel, this seemed to be the peak of the enthusiasm for this project. In an article published on January 12th, it was noted that putting the whole project together would be no easy feat, and that much of the hard work would fall on the Victory Memorial Association. While this might make sense, the association only consisted of a couple people. And with the passage of time, it seems the elephant in the room was finally being addressed, which was that this Victory Mall could take a really long time to complete. And time is money. Whatever projections the city had as to how expensive this project could be, it was probably going to be considerably more expensive. Even Mayor Baker, who was the plan's greatest proponent, and called it the most feasible idea they came up with, which can't possibly be true, showed his dedication by stating, "It may take a year, or it may take 25 years to put it all over." But not long after he made this statement, suggesting he was in it for the long haul, the Victory Mall project faded away. The last reference I found to it came from a February 6, 1919 newspaper in a somewhat vague piece where it was said that the committee and Mayor Baker would be meeting soon to discuss the matter. And then no follow-up. Nothing at all. How could something this massive, this fleshed out while still being in such early stages, just die, never to be revived? First off, I must note that there may be more information post-February 6th that I never found, but I dug deep. I looked up info using just about every keyword combination I could imagine, and nothing even close. Not even a passive reference to this as a forgotten or abandoned idea from a time much further down the road. And a project this big, I'd like to think there would still be info out there if it was considered past February. So what happened? First off, let's address the problems with this plan. The problems that its proponents either underplayed or tried to act like they didn't exist at all. I already briefly mentioned the need to condemn several city blocks to make the plan work. Mayor Baker, again, acted like this would be easy, and he was encouraged to go down to Salem and encourage the state legislature to pass legislation for them allowing what was called excess condemnation. This is where a government allows the taking of more private land than is needed for a given project with the goal of selling off the land they don't use to recoup costs from that project. And this made sense as the project's primary need would be the blocks stretching from Ankeny to Salmon and running between Park and 9th, but perhaps properties on the opposite sides of Park and 9th were also going to be condemned and opened up to appealing redevelopment. Architecture attractive to the eye of those traveling up and down this large avenue. But the fact of the matter is, most people don't support the use of condemnation powers, especially on such a grand scale as this. And even if these blocks were condemned, the city would have had to pay all of these property owners for the land. They would have had to pay to tear down dozens of buildings in line with the park blocks. Had this plan reached an advanced stage, there is little doubt there would have been strong blowback from locals, even in the immediate aftermath of the war, where Everyone was in agreement that some kind of memorial should be made. And while this, in a sense, would have finally connected the North and South Park blocks, this would have also ruined a portion of the park blocks. Again, the idea for the North Park blocks would be that they were reduced to little more than a pathway, replaced by a wide avenue running from the new Union Depot. And there's no guarantee that the same thing wouldn't have happened to the South Park blocks. So not only would several downtown blocks have to be condemned, but several park blocks, perhaps all of them, would have also been ruined. This is something else that most of Portland's citizens would not have been in support of. Erecting a major monument to the soldiers of war was one thing. Destroying several blocks of the city to make that happen was another. The funding plan, granted also something in its early planning, also felt a little half-cocked. The funding for this project would come from a combination of state, county, city, and private sources. There was no guarantee as to how much money would be obtained from each level, potentially leaving private sources to pick up a good deal of the bill. It was said the railway companies would pay for the new, multiple-square, block-sized Union Depot. Somewhat presumptuous on the city's part, that the railroads would just fall in line with that. And it was also said at least some of the cost of improving properties along the park blocks would be put on the property owners. Again, a little presumptuous by the city, thinking there would be no drama here. It seems like, with the power of the war veteran support at this time, the association and Mayor Baker just assumed that whatever they demanded, everyone would just fall in line. But these were some of the issues they were going to inevitably face had the project moved forward. So why didn't it? Well, since it appears it stopped being talked about altogether after early February 1919, we cannot say for absolute certain. But there's many things that occurred. A key one which I personally believe is the reason this Victory Mall never advanced beyond the early planning stage. Obviously, if this project was going to move forward, funding would have been an issue. And based on other large projects that were pursued around this same time, it is likely obtaining the necessary funds would have been difficult and time-consuming. And in the end, a lot of this would have, again, probably just fallen on the people of Portland. And 1919 would have its expenses. On January 6th, the day after the Victory Mall plan was officially revealed, former President Theodore Roosevelt passed away. A very popular president in Portland, something I referenced in my series on the Lewis and Clark Exposition, the city would take on a $20,000 quota later in the year to raise money for a memorial dedicated to the past president. Voters would also pass a major bond issue on June 3rd of that year to the tune of almost $1.3 million in total, including more than $500,000 for the city's parks. Beyond this, on April 21st, subscriptions would open in the United States to obtain war bonds, specifically what were called Victory Liberty Bonds. This would be the last in what would be 5 different bond issues established in order to fund America's involvement in the war. At war on the other side of the world, in a war involving several nations, this would not be like wars of the past for America, requiring substantial funding. With the people entirely behind the war effort, after America joined the Great War in April 1917, all of these bond issues were beyond successful. What made this 5th Victory Bond issue different was that it was issued months after the war had ended, hence the use of victory in its name. Even though the war was over, there were still costs to be resolved. Portland itself was given a quota to meet, amounting to $14,786,325. While most Oregon counties achieved their quotas much faster than Portland's Multnomah County, when all was said and done, the people of Portland would exceed 15 million by the start of June. Despite some criticism that it lagged behind other parts of the state, when all was said and done, in terms of the percentage of the quota they reached, Portland outperformed all other cities in the Pacific Northwest, just edging out Seattle and Tacoma. This bond effort quickly became a primary objective in Portland during the spring, and a situation where they were able to show further their support of the war effort. But even this was not the most significant event of the year. Something else big happened, and there's reason to believe its existence may very well explain why this victory mall never happened. If the main objective was showing the rest of the country how much Portland appreciated their war veterans, then there was another way to do this. At a meeting on February 14th, Valentine's Day and Oregon's 60th birthday, the decision was made to make the city's annual Rose Festival victory-themed. And once this decision was made, a week after the last reference I found to another meeting to be held on the Victory Mall happening soon, the city's attention became almost exclusively focused on making the 1919 Rose Festival the greatest ever done. And this festival was going to be substantially more expensive than those of the past, as the victory elements would be in addition to that which already happened during the general yearly festival. Eventually, a campaign began to raise $40,000 to help cover the ever-increasing costs of this upcoming event. Everyone was involved. Roses were everywhere, from any given front yard of someone's house to the recently formed International Rose Test Gardens up in the hills above town. As Portland loved to do at this time, the event was grand and it was successful. For 4 days in June 1919, Portland was the center of attention when it came to showing their respect for America's servicemen. Just about anything that could be achieved with a victory mall, aside from longevity of course, was achieved at this year's festival. The park blocks even played a prominent role in the festival, as it would have for the mall. The city went above and beyond in their efforts, taking it to another level, as was the hopes for this mall. They achieved very much the same objective, with willing involvement by locals and without having to condemn or destroy anything. The 1919 Rose Festival achieved an objective that the city of Portland had hoped for since the immediate days following the war's conclusion. Not only had it done this, but it's important to remember, simplistic though it may seem, that with time, objectives change. By the end of the Rose Festival, it was no longer only days after the war. That immediate excitement and sense of celebration that follows such a monstrous undertaking will dissipate in time. By the early summer 1919, the city had just funded and held the most successful Rose Festival ever, and its people had literally invested millions of dollars in other things. The Victory Mall was not as necessary, not as desired, and would likely prove to be an expensive, time-consuming, frustrating headache. Most of the time, and I've held this perspective about a number of possibilities I've covered that did not happen and would have changed Portland considerably, it's probably for the best that such intricate and encompassing ideas never come to be. Had it happened, sure, a potential benefit may have been had in a nice memorial park to the south end of town, one that would have been chopped in half by the construction of I-405 decades later, but otherwise, we may have lost the park blocks. And even losing a portion of these blocks would have been unacceptable. I don't care what anyone says. And what would have been the point of condemning a bunch of property to finally complete the park blocks as one long park if another part of the plan was to eliminate a part or all of them as park space altogether for what was guaranteed to become either a congestion, accident-creating avenue or something that would fall out of favor rather quickly due to its lack of use? Honestly, if it happened, it wouldn't surprise me if only years down the road the city realized how foolish eliminating the North Park blocks was, and that they would get rid of much of this avenue just to get those park blocks back again. I feel that's a key thing. Beyond the simple fact that this project would have drastically changed downtown, is that much of what would have been changed likely would have been gone years down the road. The new Union Depot might have been cool, but it's not like we couldn't survive without it. It was a cool idea on paper, whose popularity for a short time is understandable, considering its time and place.